Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. Last week, we went deep into the physiology of grief, loss, and transitions. We looked at grief not just as an emotional experience, but as a whole body process that can affect the HPA axis, cortisol rhythm, inflammation, digestion, pregnenolone, progesterone, and the body and brain's ability to process and integrate loss. And the core idea was this: grief does not just change how we feel, it changes how the body organizes itself. It can alter rhythm, immune function, hormone pathways, and the way that our nervous system detects safety. When grief does not have the conditions to move through the body, the system may continue organizing itself around an unresolved threat. So today, I want to take that conversation into the next layer, because once we understand what grief is doing physiologically, the next question becomes, how do we support the body in reorganizing? Not by forcing release, not by trying to bypass the grief, but by asking, what pattern is this person in? What has not completed? What does the body need in order to feel safe enough to move again? So today we're going to talk about fascia, herbs, homeopathy, somatic practices, and a spiritual or yogic lens for grief, loss, and transition. Before I go into remedies or herbs, I want to deepen one key concept: that grief doesn't just get stored. It changes tissue tone, fluid dynamics, and signaling across systems. And this is where our fascia comes in. When we talk about grief being held in the body, we're not speaking metaphorically. We're talking about changes in fascial tone, hydration, and tension patterns. So fascia is a continuous sensory communicative network. It is richly innervated, it responds to stress hormones, and it transmits force, but also information. So when grief is unresolved, the body may shift into protective bracing patterns. Our diaphragm can become restricted, so it feels harder to breathe. The thoracic fascia may tighten as well. Our jaw, our pelvis, our shoulder girdle might hold some of that tension or bracing. And our breath can become really shallow and shift our vagal tone as well. Over time, fascia becomes less elastic, less hydrated, and more fixed. So this is not just structural, even though you might feel really tight and tense, but it's emotional physiology becoming tissue memory. So grief that doesn't move through the nervous system often gets organized in the fascia as what I would call a holding pattern. And this is exactly why in an upcoming episode, I'm going to go deeper into fascia and then even further into the extracellular matrix, because this is where physiology starts to meet information and information starts to meet consciousness. So I'm going to read one more excerpt from the book that I shared last week, and that's Stephen Levine's Healing into Life and Death. And this time I'm reading from chapter 2, Developing a Healing Practice. Though grieved in mind and body, and at times feeling hopeless, we are never helpless. We have ways of healing within us which have seldom been acknowledged by anyone. There are tools available which, well applied, can take us beyond even our greatest suffering. Each of the meditations which follow is such a tool. Each holds the possibility of healing. These techniques are like gardening implements. Some can be used to prepare the soil, such as the forgiveness and grief meditations. Others are nutrients which encourage germination, such as the loving kindness meditation, the soft belly meditation, and the breath exercise. Some are like a plow employed for ongoing cultivation, such as the mindfulness and body sweeping meditations, which are lifelong healing practices. Each creates the conditions in which grace can grow. Some of these practices are used just for moving boulders or pulling stumps, such as the heavy state meditation, the heart of the womb meditation, the discomfort meditation, or the healing meditation. They are specialized tools for opening and removing of specific obstacles. So I'm not going to read through all the meditations, but I do want you to know that there are tools like this. This is such a gem, and I'll put it in the show notes. And we are never helpless, right? And today I'm going to talk about some other tools in the healing process. And I want to say this clearly as I jump into herbs and homeopathy. We're not treating grief. There's nothing wrong with grief or loss or transition, even though it feels bad. We're supporting the pattern the body is in while experiencing grief. So remember we talked about how acute grief or loss can put us into that sympathetic fight or flight pattern. So think high cortisol. You might have anxiety, insomnia, agitation, a tight chest, or shallow breath. And this is where we're going to think about some of our calming nervines. So, one of my favorite herbs in this moment is passiflora or passion flower. It's going to help with GABA modulation. So, again, that calming inhibitory neurotransmitter. It's going to reduce mental overactivity, and it's going to be helpful for racing thoughts and insomnia. Next is Melissa officinalis or lemon balm, and that's going to be calming but uplifting. So it's going to help support mood and nervous system, and it mildly supports thyroid and digestion as well. I'll often combine lemon balm, passion flower, and this next one, chamomile. Most people have known about that for a while, right? We're always talking about chamomile tea. It is a gentle parasympathetic support herb. It's also anti-inflammatory. It's also good for gut and nervous system overlap. So if you're in the throes of grief and your digestion is impacted, this is a great one to reach for. And then scutellaria as well. So skullcap is a little bit of a stronger nervine. And so this I might use when there's nervous system exhaustion with agitation, and lavender as well. So lavendula is going to help modulate autonomic tone and is really helpful for anxiety and sleep. These herbs are not sedative, but they're going to help the nervous system shift state. And remember, they're going to help the nervous system to feel safe. Now, if we have chronic dysregulated cortisol, think wired and tired or poor rhythm or crashes of cortisol. So maybe you have that up, down cortisol pattern that I've talked about before. I might think of herbs like withania or ashwagandha, which is going to modulate the HPA axis. It will help normalize cortisol patterns over time and support resilience. I often use it in sleep blends long term. We might think of rhodiola. So this is an adaptogenic herb that's more stimulating. So it's going to be good if there's fatigue or mental fog through this dysregulated cortisol pattern. I might think of eleuthero, which is going to support adrenal resilience without overstimulation. I might think of glycyrrhiza or licorice, and this is going to be key in increasing cortisol, but also you have to be careful if you have hypertension. But adaptogens aren't necessarily boosting our system. They're really helping reorganize it toward regulation. They're helping us adapt to the stress of loss or grief. More specifically for grief in a traditional energetic lens herbally, I might use hawthorn or crataegus, which is a heart tonic, and it can be helpful for both physical and emotional disruptions of heart rhythm and coherence. So for grief, that can feel like loss in the deep loss in the chest. Or I might use tilia, which can soften the tension around grief and support emotional release and relaxation. I'll very often use that in the form of gemotherapy, actually, and I'll have patients lie on a yoga block and open up their chest and kind of open up their heart chakra and dose the gemotherapy at the same time while they maybe do a visualization or one of the guided meditations in the book I just shared. I might use rose for grief, heartbreak, emotional protection, and again, that gentle opening of the heart space. I might use mimosa or the tree of happiness for grief with depression and emotional stagnation. So Some herbs are not just calming the nervous system or working as adaptogens on stress response, but they're helping the heart to metabolize the experience. Homeopathy is one of the most precise ways we can work with grief because it doesn't treat grief as a category. It treats how grief is expressed in the individual. In homeopathy, we're looking for individual patterns. And just talking with a patient about the remedy that I'm going to pick or asking them questions around how grief shows up for them in and of itself can be really therapeutic. But some of the key remedies for grief patterns that I see or use would be ignatia. So I might use ignatia in acute grief when there's a lump in the throat or sighing, like or emotional swings. I might use it in suppressed grief. I might use it immediately after a loss when there's a lot of kind of hysteria around the loss. Natrum muriaticum, I will use in chronic grief. These patients tend to be very reserved or internalized with their grief, that kind of I'm fine exterior, and they might have a lot of difficulty crying, and they might say that they're better by the sea or the ocean. Pulsatilla, I will use when that patient is weepy and they're seeking comfort in their grief process and they're better connected and maybe getting a hug or feeling like they're cared for. And there might be some emotional fluidity to their symptom picture. Homeopathic aurum, I'm going to use when there's deep despair around a loss. There's a loss of purpose, maybe in some of those identity transitions or a loss of a job. I might find that aurum is helpful. There's more of this existential grief. And phosphoric acid I might use when grief is really leading to depletion. So apathy and burnout and like really, really low levels of energy, I might think phosphoric acid. So again, in homeopathy, we're not asking what happened, what's the diagnosis. We're asking how did your system organize around what happened and what are the patterns that you're exhibiting. I might be weaving in herbal medicine and gemotherapy, homeopathy with somatic practices as well. So grief becomes dysregulation when a stress response is initiated but not completed. We talked about that in the first part. So somatic work is more about completion than expression. Some simple somatic practices might be exhale weighted breathing. So that long, slow exhale that's going to contribute to vagal tone and activation of your vagus nerve. It's going to reduce sympathetic tone, bring on that parasympathetic response. So that's so simple, right? Just longer exhales than inhales. So you can inhale to a count of 4, exhale to a count of 6. If you want to make it a little bit more complicated, you can have a breath hold in the middle. I've walked you guys through box breathing before. So just activating your parasympathetic nervous system with breath can be really profound. Orienting, so eyes and head gently scanning the environment. This can reestablish safety. You might add in some sensory orientation to that. So not only things that you can see, but things you can hear or smell or touch or taste. You might move on to some gentle movement, so walking or swaying or rocking, or even some EMDR style therapy to connect the different hemispheres of your brain and restore rhythm. You might do some tremoring or shaking or moving the energy and stress response through to completion and discharging stored activation if it arises naturally. And sometimes we do need to be resourced or co-regulating with another to feel safe to do this. Just a simple hand on your heart or belly can increase interoceptive awareness and reconnection to the body, again, establishing that sense of safety. So the body doesn't have to be forced to release. It does need to feel safe enough to complete, though. I really do find that laying down on a yoga mat and on a yoga block and just laying with emotion and feeling is something that most of the women in my practice really benefit from. And if we look at grief and loss through a yogic lens or a more spiritual lens, grief can be seen as prana disruption or disruption of chi and life force. So in yogic philosophy, prana is our life force. And naturopathic medicine, we talk about the vis, right? We talk about vitality and vitalism. And grief really disrupts pranavayu or heart-lung energy. We talked about how in Chinese medicine, grief is stored in the lungs with Dr. Mark. We talked about it being metal and that lung drainage. We got into how we can release that through the body in that interview. Grief is also going to impact the Udana Vayu or our throat chakra. So this can look like tightness in the chest. It can look like shallow breath or inability to express oneself or feeling stuck. So pranayama breath work is always going to be helpful in this situation. You can do an alternate nostril breathing. You can, again, lengthen those exhales in pranayama. You can have heart centered awareness breathing. I talk about heart math a lot, where we're bringing attention and focus to breathing into our heart space. And we're remembering gratitude, appreciation, even times of joy, maybe with that person that we've lost, or memories of the life we had. And then I do also like to pull in visualizations around where we want to go and picturing ourselves having joy and happiness and bliss and the things that bring us peace and contentment when I'm doing an exercise like that. From a deeper perspective, grief is never something to eliminate. It is something that can reveal attachment, love, identity. And in so many traditions, grief really is seen as a threshold experience, not a failure of our system, even though it hurts, but an invitation into deeper awareness. So whether we're talking about cortisol, pregnenolone, fascia, breathwork, herbs, homeopathy, somatic work, or spiritual practices, we're not doing separate things. We're working with the same principle that restoring conditions allows the body to reorganize after loss. When I've experienced major losses or transitions in my life, I really have done well with the analogy that grief is going to have a wave with us. I interviewed a mentor of mine, Dr. Valerie Simonson, and she taught me this line that life has a wave with us when I preceptored with her in Maui. And I've applied that to loss in my life and to grief, because it is like being in the ocean. It is going to slam you. There are going to be days where you cannot get out of bed, or you get out of bed and you're making all the wrong choices and choosing the numbness or the substance, or not living the life that you imagined or wanted for yourself, right? It is going to smack you down, and you won't be the same after you go through the waves. You might be washed onto shore a completely different human being, but the more that you learn how to ride the waves of emotion, the more that you learn the tools that can bring you back, the more that you learn how to enjoy the sunshine when you're at the top of that wave, the more that your body learns, okay, I'm safe. I can make it through. I'm going to have a moment where I can breathe again. And I'm not saying that it necessarily makes it easy, but if you can remember that grief is the body reorganizing itself, it is changing your cortisol, it is going to impact your sleep. You can have more grace through the process and more forgiveness and more self-compassion and acceptance. And the more you know what's going on physiologically, I personally find that the more you're able to then commit to the things that will be healthy, that will get you through that wave of grief and bring you to the shore. And we stop asking what supplement will fix this or take the pain away. What hormone do I need to take? What medication can I be on? Because yes, grief not only is situational, but it can have these long-term impacts that we've talked about in these episodes. But we can ask deeper questions. We can really figure out what our system is trying to complete. What new version of ourselves can we feed? Because cortisol does not normalize simply because time passes. Time will not heal all wounds in my experience. Pregnenolone pathways do not rebalance if the body's still in survival mode every day, and we never enter in tools that help bring our body back to safety. Progesterone doesn't fully hold if the system does not feel safe. So the body can't prioritize long-term hormone balance when it's still trying to survive something that it hasn't processed. So even if the grief or the transition or the loss was many, many, many years ago, your body might still be in that survival state. So healing's not about forcing the body to move on. It's not about just letting time pass. It's about creating the conditions where the body can heal, where the body can finally complete what it never got to complete. And that's where grief becomes not only something that we survive, but something that reorganizes us. And you will then arrive on the shore with deeper embodiment and eventually a different kind of wholeness. And my wish for anyone experiencing grief or loss or transitions is that they do feel that joy, that lightness, that hope, that sunshine again, and that they have glimpses of that through the process, and that they have someone who they can co-regulate with and feel safe with. Because if you take anything from this episode, is that you need to feel safe in order to move grief through. So if this resonated with you, please download and subscribe, follow along so you don't miss any episodes, and share it with someone who you think might benefit from what we talked about today. As always, the body heals, and it is my priority to share with you that you can experience life fully human and deeply healed through all of the griefs, losses, and transitions that midlife will present to you. I hope you have a great day.